This will be part 2 in the series on Life Evolves. And right off the bat, we're going to introduce a simple sort of definition for evolution. A useful DNA-based trait increases in the population, and we'll call such a trait an adaptation. So we're going to use a simple example involving a population of bacteria here undergoing some change over time. And that'll help us understand the basic concept of evolution. Let's take a look on the left here. We see a population of red bacteria. Now, the little arrows mean that they're eating certain food in their environment, in this case, the green food molecules. However, there are also orange food molecules available, but they can't eat them at this time. Over here on the right, population of blue bacteria, they can eat the orange food in addition to the green food. So there has been some change that happened over time, and this is the evolutionary change we're going to investigate. Let's zoom in on this initial population of red bacteria. Notice they are importing the green food molecules so they can get energy from eating the green food. Now, as they eat, of course, they're going to grow. And we learned earlier that cells cannot keep growing to larger and larger size because they face an energy shortage. So what do? They divide. So as cells grow and then reproduce, they're going to be making more individuals in the population. So population size increases. Let's just recap some features of reproduction. As cells grow, they face an energy shortage. Remember, the energy production increases in relation to the surface area because the bank proteins were inserted into the membrane of the cell. And so there's a limitation to how many proteins you can insert into the membrane that are making ATP. However, the energy needs of the cell are related to volume. And as a cell grows, the volume grows faster than the surface area. So cells face a limitation of ATP production. So what do cells do? They duplicate their DNA and they divide, and that restores small cell size and sufficient ATP production. So let's return to our population here. We've got more individuals in the same environment, but that sets up a problem. You've got more mouths to feed, as it were. Notice the green food is being depleted. As more and more of these red bacteria are eating up all the green food, there's now a food shortage. And this can spell disaster for many members in the population. Some of these bacteria are going to starve to death. Now, this is a general feature in many natural environments, a competition for food. In the 1800s, biologists like Charles Darwin coined a phrase, a struggle for existence occurs in nature. And this is metaphorical. It doesn't mean that individuals are physically fighting things in their environment necessarily. It just means that there are factors in the environment that are causing the deaths of some individuals and not others. So struggle for existence means that many won't survive to reproduce. There is massive death caused by a lack of food, predators, disease, climate challenges, etc. Now in this scene, something new has happened. A blue bacterium was born different than the red one. So it has a new mutation. Of course, the blue one had parents that were red bacteria, but a new mutation occurred, and now this blue one is different somehow. Now we're going to say this mutation was random, meaning it happened without regard to the well-being of the bacterium. DNA mutations can change protein function, which can change the cell's characteristics or traits. So we want to think of this DNA mutant here as having some different capacity, different from the red individuals. Now variations are differences, and some variations are significant, like the ability to get food efficiently. So we want to think of the blue mutant here as being different, and we'll see it's different in a very significant way. Now, if being blue were the only difference, it might not make a difference to survival. But remember, the blueness is not the key here. We're simply making it blue to indicate it has a DNA mutation that affected the function of some protein, and that makes it different from the others. So we'll focus on relevant variations, and these are differences that make a difference to survival, and they must be heritable. Well, since it's a DNA mutation, it will be heritable as DNA is duplicated and passed on. So the existence of variation means that individuals have an unequal chance of survival. It is not random who survives and who dies. So if the blue one is different from the red one, in a way that makes a difference to survival, then it's not random who gets to survive. Individuals with the best traits, the ones that can get the most food because of some difference, are going to have an advantage. So the relevant difference here is that the blue bacteria can import the green food, but also the orange food, as we see here. And this ability gives the blue bacteria an advantage compared to the red bacteria, under conditions where the green food is in short supply. So that's the difference that makes a difference, and it sets up unequal chances of survival. If the green food is disappearing and the blue ones are mutants that can also eat the orange food, well, they have a definite advantage. The blue bacteria have a survival advantage and so have more offspring. So the consequences of being able to get more food means that the blue ones are going to have more offspring. So the blue trait begins to increase in the population each generation. And that's what we mean by evolution. This useful trait is increasing in the population because it provided a survival advantage which led to a reproductive advantage. So it's important to kind of get the subtlety of this. The red bacteria are not turning blue. Rather, the blue bacteria are having more offspring and replacing what would have been the offspring of the red bacteria, who were starving at higher rates. And again, importantly, if there was no shortage of green food, the blue bacteria would not have an advantage and so would not increase in the population. You see, if there was plenty of green food here, even though the blue ones could eat the orange food, they wouldn't have an advantage if there is plenty of green food. So the population will not become more and more blue if there's plenty of green food for everybody to eat. Also, populations evolve. Individuals do not. Individuals are simply born with whatever DNA they inherited from their parents, plus any new mutations. As useful traits increase in the population over time, most individuals will have the trait. So we see the useful mutation increasing in the population until most everybody in the population has that useful trait. So we would call that a species-wide adaptation. Now, we could say the ability to eat the orange food is the adaptation already at this point here, but typically when we think about adaptations in nature, most individuals of a species have the adaptation because it has been some time since the original mutation, and now the mutation has swept through the population, and so pretty much everybody has the useful trait. So we'll call that a species-wide adaptation. In summary then, it all started with one individual, but that individual had more than the average number of offspring, and so did its descendants each generation. So here's the original mutant here, and here it's eating some green food, but as the green food disappears, it can also make use of the orange food, and now it has a survival advantage, and now it's going to have more offspring, and so over time, the blue bacteria replace the red bacteria who are starving at higher rates. Notice the bacteria were not originally designed to eat the orange food molecules. Rather, they evolved this ability through a natural process. Bacteria showed variation in food acquisition, and the environment favored the orange food eating trait. We're also going to, in place of this word favored here, sometimes we'll say the environment selected the orange food eating trait. So the population was interacting with the environment. In this case, the food shortage favored the blue mutants, or selected the blue mutants. They're the ones that had the survival advantage in the new circumstance, shortage of the food, and they out-reproduced their red competitors. And here's another way of thinking about this idea that the environment is selecting the orange food-eating trait. Well, it's selecting the orange food-eating trait by punishing individuals who can only eat the green food. So it's kind of like a filter. Natural selection is like a filter. And if you have a certain characteristic, like you can eat both the green and the orange, you're going to survive. But if you can only eat the green, you're being punished. You're being weeded out of the population. So the ones that survive are the selected individuals with whatever trait that allowed them to survive. Simply put, individuals with the most useful traits survive and reproduce more than others. The population is evolving a new adaptation, the ability to utilize a new food source. Notice the change in the population occurred in response to a change in the environmental conditions, the depletion of the green food molecules. So the changing environment can change species. It's the changing environment that changed this population over time. In the mid-1800s, Charles Darwin coined the term natural selection to refer to the process that causes a population to evolve adaptations. He wrote a famous book on the origin of species by means of natural selection, with the subtitle, or the preservation of favored races in the struggle for life. And in this book, he lays out the case that living things did indeed change over time, and that a principal mechanism for that change is natural selection. More technically, natural selection is the differential survival and reproduction of individuals with the most fit traits. And a fit trait is a DNA-based trait that helps the individual in its current environment. Now, Darwin used the word natural here because it's the environmental conditions that are interacting with populations to change them over time. It's not God. In the 1800s in England, the prevailing views about the natural world were rooted in Christian thinking. And so many people believe that God was responsible for creating different species and equipping them with adaptations. And so Darwin is going to reject that view in favor of a natural process that is producing adaptations over time. He used the word selection because the environmental conditions like food scarcity, predators, disease, climate, etc., are causing individuals with different traits to have different survival outcomes. Metaphorically, selecting some to die and others to survive. So it's important to note this selection thing is not a conscious selection. It's a cause and effect process. It's just certain features of the environment are causing some individuals to have better survival rates than other individuals because of some difference, some DNA-based difference that they possess. So we can write the recipe for natural selection using these three concepts. First, we have to have a population that shows variation. And this variation in traits, these differences in traits, have to be due to DNA differences. Then we need some factor in the environment that is setting up unequal chances of survival. So some factor of the environment is causing some individuals to die more and others to survive more due to some variation they possess. And then because that variation is based in DNA, the survivors pass on that useful trait, that's the heredity component. Well then, if you have all these three things in play, you're going to get evolution by natural selection. So adaptations increase in the population and in fact can even get better over time with new mutations. Because this process of natural selection isn't just happening in one generation, it's continually happening in every generation. Every species on planet Earth is being forged and shaped by this process of natural selection. So at this point you can pause the video and read a couple of summary points about this lesson. In the next part, we're going to examine the nature of the DNA mutations that gave these little blue bacteria the survival advantage.